The headlights came down our lane like hunters, 3 of them cutting across the dark like a warning. My wife reached for my hand without a word, and in that instant I knew something had changed. This was no ordinary intimidation. They were organized, brazen, and they had their eyes on her. My heart pounded while the world narrowed to her face and the cold gravel under our feet. I would have done anything to keep her safe. They didn't know what happened next. If you like true, tense neighborhood stories with surprising twists, please subscribe. I post stories like this regularly. We had lived in that house 12 years by then, the old craftsman my wife and I restored together, the rosebushes she insists on pruning in April, the vegetable patch in the back that fed every Sunday potluck. I like to think we were invisible in a comfortable way, part of the quiet hum of suburbia, people who kept to their own business and waved on mail mornings. My wife Lena taught 3rd grade, baked pies for fundraisers, and volunteered twice a month at the library. She was gentle, the sort who would mend a neighbor's hem without making a fuss. I loved her for that softness, for the way she could make a house feel like an honest home. That evening started like any other. We had dinner, put the dishes away together, and were sitting on the back porch with mugs of tea. Fireflies blinked in the yard. Butter, our old shepherd mix, snored on the kitchen mat. I remember Lena telling me about a child in her class who'd finally read an entire book by himself. The way her eyes lit up at that small victory made me forget how cold the night had been an hour earlier. Then the truck pulled up and everything went quiet. 3 men got out. Not the skinny teenagers who took shortcuts through our yard to get to the baseball diamond. These were older, with jackets thick enough to make noise when they moved, boots that left dark scars in the gravel. One of them stepped close to the hedge and peered over toward the porch like he owned the place. "Who are they?" I mouthed, standing slowly. Lena's fingers tightened around my mug. She didn't look afraid so much as measured, like a woman cataloging details. That alone unsettled me more than the men outside. "Don't give them a reason," she said quietly, but her voice was steady. "Lock the back door." I did as she said. The front porch light clicked on and the men glanced toward it. One of them, broad-shouldered, a knot of hair starting to gray at the temples, called out in a voice that meant business. "You Lena Andrews," he said, eyes on the window where she stood. She stepped forward and kept her back to me, showing only her profile. "Yes," she answered. "Can I help you?" "We need you to come down to the community meeting tomorrow. Board says attendance is mandatory." He smiled thinly, his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Word is you've been organizing things without permission." A chill ran down my spine. "That's a mistake," I said before I could stop myself. "She volunteers at the school." "She couldn't possibly," the man cut me off with a grunt. "Not your business, sir. We're just delivering the notice." They left as suddenly as they'd come, the truck's engine coughing to life and lights disappearing down the lane. Lena watched until the taillights were gone. When she turned back, her hands were a little shaky, and I realized then that she'd been holding more than a cup of tea, she'd been holding a fuse. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying their faces, the clipped words, the way they'd used mandatory like a threat. When the phone rang around midnight I jumped, half sure it would be them again, only to hear my neighbor's voice, low and urgent. "John, sorry to wake you. Did you see 3 men in a black pickup by the school? Tom says they were asking about Lena. Are you okay?" He sounded worried, which made me angrier than I expected. "Thanks for calling, Stan. We're fine, but they came here. We'll be at the meeting tomorrow." Why would anyone target Lena? I tried to keep my voice calm, but it came out thin. "Some people don't like folks making things happen without their say-so," Stan muttered. "Be careful." The line went dead and I sat in the dark thinking of the men and of the word mandatory that they'd used like a hammer. The next morning the neighborhood had that thin hush of shared unease. The HOA sign near the mailboxes looked different somehow. Its polite rules suddenly felt like a ledger they'd check off against us. Lena left for school the same way she always did, but she kissed my forehead in a way I hadn't seen in years, soft and urgent. At the community hall that evening, the air held the smell of coffee and old folding chairs. The board met in their usual circle, polite faces, clipboards, an air of small power that tightened around the room like a lid. Ms. Karen sat at the head, posture immaculate and a smile that did not reach her eyes. She'd been a fixture for years, one of those people who loved bylaws like scripture. Lately, though, she'd taken on a sharper edge. The way she steered the meetings had the quiet force of someone protecting her kingdom. When the open comments came, most people asked about potholes and the community garden watering schedule. Then Lena stood. She was careful with her words, gentle, as always. "I'd like to propose a free reading hour at the library on Saturdays," she said, voice soft. "We can make it for kids who don't have books at home." A few murmurs of approval. Ms. Karen's lips thinned. She stood and folded her hands. "That's a lovely idea, Lena, but all events need prior approval and permits. Also, anyone organizing community programs must register with the board." Lena smiled. "I understand. I'll fill out the form." "I just thought, you need to wait, dear," Ms. Karen interrupted in that clipped way. "There are procedures. We can't just have everyone running events without oversight." She turned to the audience and raised her voice. "And while we're on the subject of unauthorized activities, we've had complaints about people organizing fundraising on private property. That must stop. The board is watching." A low, almost inaudible ripple of discomfort moved through the crowd. I felt it like static along my skin. The man who'd come to our yard the night before sat at the back, apparently one of Ms. Karen's community enforcers, and watched Lena with a slight, satisfied curl at the edge of his mouth. My fists clenched. I bit back the answer I wanted to give. After the meeting, in the dim hallway outside the hall, a young woman stopped Lena and whispered, "Be careful. They're not just picky. They'll try to break people who make waves." Lena thanked her simply, then turned toward me. We walked home in silence. Butter trotted behind us, blissfully unaware. On the porch, Lena took my hands in both of hers and looked at me steady-eyed in a way she often did when we faced something together. "John," she said softly, "I have to tell you something. It's complicated, but it might explain why they're so interested." I braced myself. She drew a breath and continued. "Before I taught third grade, I worked overseas for a few years doing special work. It's not public. I never wanted it to be a thing here. I just wanted to be Lena, your wife." The air seemed to hold its breath. "Special work?" I echoed, feeling a strange mixture of betrayal and curiosity. She squeezed my hands. "I was cleared for work that involved national work. That's all I'll say for now. I didn't tell people because it's not who I am here. But maybe some of that past made me a target." She looked at me, vulnerable and direct. "If they meant harm, I'll do what I must. But I don't want to put our life in danger." For a moment I was too stunned to speak. Their dark truck, their mandatory notices, suddenly the pieces fit into a shape I hadn't wanted to see. Pride rose quickly inside me, accompanied by a deep worry. Lena had always been quiet about the parts of herself she considered none of anyone's business. I loved that about her. Now, that secret has become a beacon. "I don't want them to hurt you," I said finally. She smiled through a shadow of worry. "Then let's make sure they don't." Her voice dropped to a hard whisper just for me. "There are ways to end games like this. But we'll be careful. We do not escalate. We do not panic. We plan." The porch light glowed over us as if waiting. I nodded, feeling the old steady resolve settle on my shoulders, the same resolve that had set me back on that farm so many years ago. Whatever came next, we would face it together. The men outside might have thought they were playing a game, but Lena wasn't a target. She was a person with a past they had underestimated. And I suspected they were about to learn just how badly they had misread us. The next morning, the neighborhood felt different. Our sleepy cul-de-sac, usually alive with the sound of sprinklers and kids on bikes, had a faint hum of unease. I noticed curtains twitch when I stepped outside to fetch the paper. Butter padded along beside me, tail wagging as if nothing were wrong, but I could feel the weight of unseen eyes. Inside, Lena stood at the kitchen counter scrolling through her phone. Her expression was calm, too calm. "They're watching the street," she said without looking up. 2 cars parked at opposite ends since dawn. Same truck from last night. I joined her at the window. Sure enough, a black pickup idled near the mailboxes, engine off, windows tinted. Another sedan sat a few houses down. No plates visible. The sight made my stomach tighten. "What do they want?" I muttered. Lena set her phone down and met my eyes. Intimidation. Standard tactic. They want us rattled before the next HOA vote. I blinked. "You sound like you've seen this before." "I have," she said quietly. "Different uniforms, same game." The way she said it, controlled, factual, reminded me that my wife had lived a life I barely knew. It wasn't a boast, just the truth. "Then what's our move?" I asked. Her lips curved into a small, deliberate smile. "Documentation. Evidence. We don't confront, we collect." By mid-morning we had cameras positioned in every corner of the property. I followed Lena's instructions: angles covering the road, a time-stamped feed to a cloud drive, backups on 2 external hard drives. She moved with a crisp efficiency that startled me, every gesture purposeful. Around noon, a knock rattled the front door. I opened it to find Karen herself standing on the porch, flanked by 2 of the same burly men from the night before. She wore a tailored blazer despite the heat and held a clipboard like a weapon. "Good afternoon, John," she said with a smile that smelled of varnish. "We're here to address several violations on your property. Overgrown hedges, unapproved exterior lighting, and a shed that appears to exceed HOA size regulations." My jaw tightened. "Our hedges are trimmed, the lights were approved last year, and the shed is grandfathered in. You know that." Karen's smile didn't waver. "The board has revised certain bylaws. Compliance is mandatory." She glanced toward Lena, who had stepped beside me. "Failure to address these issues may result in fines or further action." Lena tilted her head, eyes steady. "Further action?" Karen's lashes fluttered. "Legal measures. Perhaps towing non-compliant vehicles." It was a thinly veiled threat aimed at Lena's beloved Jeep. "Thank you for the notice," Lena said evenly. "Please provide the updated bylaws in writing." Karen shifted, clearly irritated by the lack of fear in Lena's tone. "We'll see you at the next board meeting," she said, pivoting sharply before her entourage followed her down the driveway. When the truck disappeared, Lena closed the door and turned to me. "They're escalating." "Good. It means they're sloppy." That night we reviewed the camera footage together. Every angle showed the truck lingering, the sedan circling, Karen's men stepping onto our lawn without invitation. Lena cataloged each clip with date and time. "Once we have a pattern," she explained, "we present it to the sheriff. But first, we need them to overstep." I frowned. "Isn't this already enough?" "Legally, it's borderline. We need undeniable trespass or harassment." "Patience, John." 2 days later, they gave us exactly what we needed. It started with the fence. I was repairing a loose panel near the vegetable garden when I heard the low growl of an engine. The black pickup rolled up and stopped directly in front of the gate. 3 men climbed out and approached without a word. "Can I help you?" I called, heart hammering. The gray-templed man from before smirked. "Board business. Need to inspect your outbuildings." "You have no warrant," I said firmly. "Get off my property." He stepped closer, boots crunching the gravel. "We can make this easy or hard." "Up to you." Before I could respond, Lena appeared at my side holding her phone. "This is private property," she said loudly, her voice carrying across the yard. "You are trespassing. Leave immediately. You are being recorded." The man froze, eyes flicking toward the camera mounted on the shed. Behind him, another man muttered something under his breath. "You don't scare us," he sneered. "I'm not trying to," Lena replied calmly. "But the county sheriff might. Your plates are already on file." For a long moment, no one moved. Then, with a sharp curse, they retreated to the truck and sped off, tires spitting gravel. I exhaled shakily. That was intense. Lena lowered her phone. "Perfect," she said. "Now we have criminal trespass on video." That evening we drove to the sheriff's office. Lena laid out the evidence with methodical precision, dates, times, footage, even a printed map of the men's movements. The deputy's brows climbed higher with every clip. "This is more than a neighborhood dispute," he said finally. "We'll assign a patrol car and open a case. You'll hear from us soon." Relief washed through me, but Lena remained composed. As we left the station, she squeezed my hand. "This is only the first step. Karen won't stop until she's exposed." I studied her profile in the dim light of the dashboard. "You're not scared, are you?" Her lips curved faintly. "I've faced worse. They just don't know it yet." Back home, the night air carried the scent of cut grass and coming rain. For a moment I allowed myself to believe the worst was behind us. But when we pulled into the driveway, a fresh envelope waited on the porch, stamped with the HOA seal and the word urgent in bold red letters. Lena bent to pick it up, her expression unreadable. "And so," she murmured, "the next move begins." She slipped the envelope into her jacket without opening it. "Let them think they're in control," she whispered as we stepped inside. "It makes the end that much sweeter." I locked the door behind us, my pulse thrumming with equal parts fear and anticipation. Whatever was inside that envelope would ignite the next round, and Lena, calm as ever, was already 3 moves ahead. When morning broke, our quiet suburban street felt different, like the air itself was holding its breath. Word of the midnight standoff had already spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Cars slowed to a crawl in front of our house, drivers craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the CIA lady everyone was suddenly whispering about. For years, the HOA board had acted like an untouchable monarchy. Neighbors feared the endless fines, the late-night harassment, and the petty intimidation tactics. But now, for the first time, it seemed the spell had been broken. Inside our kitchen, the smell of fresh coffee mingled with an electric tension. Claire sat across from me at the breakfast table, her eyes sharper than I'd ever seen them. The late-night adrenaline had faded, but a calm determination remained. She set her mug down and said quietly, "They won't stop just because I showed them my credentials. Men like Lewis can't let go of power that easily." I nodded, knowing she was right. "So what's our next move?" She leaned back, considering. "First, we secure evidence. Everything they did last night was illegal: trespassing, harassment, impersonating law enforcement. The HOA bylaws give them zero authority to enforce anything beyond property maintenance. But we need proof if we want this to hold up in court." Claire's voice was steady, but I caught a flicker of anger beneath the surface. She wasn't just protecting us anymore, she was preparing to dismantle the very structure that had allowed these people to terrorize an entire neighborhood. Before we could plan further, a sharp knock rattled the front door. I instinctively tensed, but Claire rose without hesitation. Through the peephole, she saw a familiar figure, Officer Daniels, the local police sergeant who had responded to the scene the night before. "Morning," he said when she opened the door, his tone carefully neutral. "Mind if I step in for a quick chat?" We ushered him inside. Daniels removed his cap and exhaled heavily. "I wanted to follow up on what happened. My officers reviewed the body cam footage. Those men had fake badges, fake IDs, even fake uniforms. We've already impounded their equipment. One of them, your HOA president, Lewis, spent the night in county jail." Claire folded her arms. "Good. But you know this isn't over. Lewis isn't the kind of man who acts alone. Someone bankrolled those props and planned that stunt." Daniels gave a grim nod. "You're right. We've opened a criminal investigation. But I also need to warn you, he's out on bail already. And judging by his attitude, he's not exactly repentant." I felt my stomach tighten. "So what do we do?" "Stay alert," Daniels said. "Document everything. If they harass you again, call us immediately. We're taking this seriously." After he left, Claire paced the living room like a strategist mapping a battlefield. "We need more than just police reports," she said. "We need to hit them where it hurts, legally and financially." That afternoon, she dug through our filing cabinet and pulled out every HOA document we'd ever received, meeting minutes, violation letters, fine notices. Her fingers flew over the papers, highlighting inconsistencies and scribbling notes. It was like watching a forensic analyst at work. "These fees they've been charging neighbors," she said, pointing to a spreadsheet. "Completely arbitrary. Half of them aren't backed by any clause in the bylaws. And this," she tapped a section of Lewis's expense reports, "this is outright embezzlement. He's been funneling HOA funds into a private account." I blinked. "How do you even spot that so fast?" Claire gave a faint smile. "Tradecraft. Paper trails are just another kind of intelligence network." While she compiled evidence, I visited our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, a sweet retiree who had lived here for 20 years. She answered the door with wide eyes. "I heard what happened last night," she whispered. "Is it true? Your wife, she's CIA?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Former CIA. And yes, everything you heard is true." Mrs. Thompson's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank God someone finally stood up to those bullies. They fined me $500 last month because my grandson parked his car in the driveway overnight. I was afraid to fight back." She invited me in, and soon a small group of neighbors gathered, people who'd all suffered under the HOA's reign of terror. There was Mr. Patel, who'd been fined for planting roses without pre-approval, and young parents who'd been threatened with eviction over a toddler's plastic playhouse. As each person shared their story, a pattern emerged: harassment, fabricated fines, selective enforcement. The HOA had turned fear into a business model. By the time I returned home, Claire had built a case file so thick it looked like a federal dossier. When I told her about the neighbors' testimonies, her eyes lit up. "Perfect. Witness statements. This isn't just a civil complaint anymore. This is racketeering." The next step was a neighborhood meeting. Claire insisted on hosting it in her backyard, where everyone could gather without fear of HOA surveillance. Word spread quickly, and by dusk nearly 30 residents were seated in folding chairs, their faces a mix of anxiety and cautious hope. Claire stood before them, a quiet authority radiating from her posture. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "Last night, some of you may have heard the commotion. the HOA leadership attempted an illegal action against my family. They impersonated law enforcement, trespassed on private property, and violated multiple state and federal statutes. A murmur rippled through the crowd. They did this, she continued, because they believe fear will keep you silent. But fear only works when you're alone. Tonight, you're not alone anymore. For the next 20 minutes, Claire laid out the evidence, the fraudulent fines, the embezzlement, the impersonation of officers. Every detail was backed by documents, photos, or video footage. When she finished, silence hung heavy in the air, then erupted into applause. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact with one another were now united by a shared resolve. Mr. Patel stood up, his voice shaking but firm. "What do we do next?" Claire met his gaze. "We file a collective lawsuit. We demand a full audit of the HOA's finances. And we petition to dissolve the current board. With enough signatures, we can force a vote and replace them entirely." The crowd buzzed with agreement. For the first time in years, people felt empowered instead of intimidated. But as the meeting ended and neighbors began to disperse, I noticed a dark sedan parked at the end of the street. Its windows were tinted, and it didn't belong to anyone on our block. Claire followed my gaze. Her eyes narrowed. "They're watching," she murmured. "Lewis won't give up without a fight." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "Do you think he'll try something again?" "Almost certainly," she said. "But this time, we'll be ready." That night, we reinforced our security system, double-checked every lock, and positioned cameras to cover every angle of the property. Claire even set up a small encrypted network to back up footage to an off-site server in real time. Around midnight, I found her in the living room, reviewing camera feeds with a look of quiet intensity. "Are you okay?" I asked softly. She turned to me, her expression softening. "I'm fine. I've handled worse than Lewis in my career. But this feels personal. These people think they can terrorize families because they wear a title. I won't let them." I reached for her hand. "You're incredible, you know that?" She squeezed back, a rare vulnerability flickering in her eyes. "We're incredible. Together." As we sat there in the dim glow of the monitors, I realized something profound. This wasn't just about an HOA anymore. It was about standing up to anyone who abuses power, whether in a neighborhood or on a national stage. Outside, the dark sedan finally drove away, its taillights disappearing into the night. But we both knew this was only the beginning. The following week unfolded like a tense game of chess. Every move we made to protect ourselves seemed to provoke an equal and opposite reaction from the HOA's leadership. Lewis and his cronies might have been exposed, but they were far from defeated. It began with small things. Anonymous letters slipped under our door, typed and signed, but unmistakably threatening. "Drop the case," one read. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Then came the sudden inspection notices, dozens of them, each claiming our lawn was non-compliant, our shutters the wrong shade of beige, our fence 2 inches too high. It was a barrage of bureaucratic harassment, a desperate attempt to drown us in paperwork and fear. But fear was no longer part of the equation. Claire met each notice with icy efficiency, filing responses backed by the very bylaws the HOA was supposed to uphold. Every fine, every complaint, she countered with evidence and legal citations. Watching her work was like watching a master spy decode enemy transmissions. Meanwhile, the neighborhood alliance we'd sparked grew stronger. Mrs. Thompson organized daily check-ins for vulnerable residents. Mr. Patel used his tech background to set up a secure group chat where neighbors could share updates and report suspicious activity. What had once been a community paralyzed by intimidation was now an organized resistance. The HOA board, sensing their grip slipping, escalated again. One rainy evening, As dusk settled over the street, a loud crash echoed from our backyard. I ran to the window and saw two masked figures sprinting toward a waiting car, the remnants of our wooden fence splintered behind them. Claire was already on the phone with the police. Within minutes, patrol cars flooded the street. Officer Daniels himself arrived, jaw clenched as he surveyed the damage. "This isn't vandalism," he said. "This is intimidation. And it's a felony." We reviewed the security footage together. The cameras had captured everything: two men wearing black hoodies and gloves, their faces partially obscured but their getaway vehicle's license plate perfectly visible. Daniels radioed it in immediately. The car was registered to an HOA board member, one of Lewis's most loyal enforcers. By the next morning, arrests were made. The two men were charged with property destruction, trespassing, and harassment. The evidence was airtight. But Lewis himself remained slippery, always managing to keep his name off the official paperwork. Claire, however, was relentless. She spent hours with the district attorney's office, providing detailed statements and organizing the mountain of evidence we'd collected. Her precision and calm authority left the prosecutors in awe. "It's like she's done this before," one whispered to me in the hallway. I just smiled. Finally, the day of the emergency HOA meeting arrived. By now, nearly every household in the neighborhood had signed the petition to remove the current board. The turnout was overwhelming, dozens of residents crammed into the community center, their frustration palpable. Lewis entered flanked by two lawyers, his usual smug confidence replaced by a forced grin. He took his seat at the front table, but when he tried to call the meeting to order, the crowd drowned him out with a chorus of boos. Claire stepped forward, her posture commanding immediate silence. "My name is Claire Matthews," she said clearly, her voice carrying through the room. "Many of you already know me. Some of you know what happened at my home. Tonight, we're not here for rumors, we're here for facts." She began to speak, presenting the evidence like a seasoned prosecutor. Photos of fake police uniforms, copies of fraudulent fines, bank records showing embezzlement of HOA funds, all projected onto a large screen for everyone to see. Lewis's lawyers tried to object, but Claire shut them down with calm precision. "This is a homeowners' meeting, not a courtroom," she said. "And every homeowner here has a right to know how their dues have been misused." Gasps and murmurs filled the room as neighbors saw the scale of the corruption. Thousands of dollars in maintenance fees had been siphoned into private accounts. Fake violations had generated tens of thousands more in fines. The so-called security team Lewis employed paid entirely with HOA money. When Claire finished, she stepped aside and let the crowd speak. One by one, neighbors stood to share their own experiences, the bogus citations, the threats, the sleepless nights. Each testimony added another nail to the coffin of the current regime. Finally, Mrs. Thompson rose, her normally gentle voice ringing with righteous anger. "We've lived in fear for too long," she said. "It ends tonight. I call for a vote to dissolve this board immediately." The room erupted in cheers. Ballots were distributed, votes collected, and within minutes the result was unanimous. The entire HOA board, including Lewis, was removed from power. Lewis stood, red-faced and trembling. "This isn't over," he spat. "You people think you've won, but you don't know who you're messing with." Claire met his glare without flinching. "Actually," she said quietly, "I think we do." As he stormed out of the building, Daniels and two uniformed officers stepped forward. "Mr. Lewis," Daniels called, his voice firm, "you're under arrest for impersonating law enforcement, fraud, and conspiracy to commit harassment." The crowd erupted in applause as Lewis was handcuffed and led away. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt truly free. But the victory wasn't just about removing a corrupt board. It was about what came next. The residents elected an interim committee, ordinary neighbors determined to rebuild the HOA into something transparent and fair. Mrs. Thompson volunteered as treasurer. Mr. Patel offered to oversee technology and communication. For the first time, people actually wanted to participate. After the meeting, neighbors approached Claire with hugs and heartfelt thanks. "You saved us," one woman said, tears in her eyes. "We never would have stood up to them without you." Claire smiled, but shook her head. "You saved yourselves," she replied. "All I did was remind you that you had the power all along." That night, as we returned home to a street buzzing with celebration, I looked at Claire with a renewed sense of awe. "You know," I said, "most people retire from the CIA and settle into quiet lives. You just led a suburban revolution." She laughed softly, her eyes glinting in the porch light. "Old habits die hard. Besides, I didn't do it alone. You stood with me every step of the way." I slipped my arm around her shoulders, feeling the tension of the past weeks finally begin to lift. "So what now?" I asked. Claire glanced down the street, where neighbors were already tearing down old HOA flyers and replacing them with notices for a community barbecue. "Now," she said, "we build something better." Over the next few days, the transformation was remarkable. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact now stopped to chat on evening walks. Children played freely in front yards without fear of arbitrary fines. Even the smallest details, the cheerful decorations, the sound of laughter, felt like a quiet rebellion against the years of oppression. The new committee began auditing the HOA's finances, uncovering even more misappropriated funds. With the district attorney's help, restitution was ordered for every homeowner who had been unfairly fined. Claire worked behind the scenes, advising the new board on security measures to prevent future abuse. One evening, as we sat on our freshly repaired porch, Officer Daniels stopped by to share an update. "Lewis took a plea deal," he said. "He's looking at several years in federal prison. And thanks to the evidence your wife provided, his accomplices are going down too." I glanced at Claire, who simply nodded, her expression unreadable. "Justice served," she said quietly. Daniels smiled. "You know, I've worked this beat for 20 years. I've never seen a neighborhood take down an HOA like this. You've set a precedent." After he left, I turned to Claire. "So, do we finally get to relax now?" She leaned against me, her gaze softening as she looked out over the peaceful street. "For now," she said. "But something tells me trouble has a way of finding us." I chuckled, kissing the top of her head. "As long as it finds us together, I'm not worried." The crickets chirped in the warm night air as neighbors gathered around a fire pit across the street, their laughter carrying on the breeze. For the first time since moving here, I felt not just safe, but truly at home. And as for Claire, my brilliant, fearless wife, she had reminded everyone, including me, of a lesson worth remembering: you don't have to work for the CIA to stand up to tyranny. You just have to refuse to be afraid.